Guys, today we'll tell you what I think about Clorinde and where I believe she stands in the meta. Yvette, Kazuha, Zhongli, characters like that are in order for them to feel good, and if you don't, they can very easily feel awful to use. If I had to describe Clorinde, she's that type of hot woman that you have a crush on, but expects you to pay for all the dinners, buy her a lot of gifts, put up with all of her red flag behavior, and at the end of the day, you're wondering, oh, okay, this girl is hot, but is this worth my time, money, and mental health? And are we even talking about Genshin here anymore? But the point I'm trying to make is that in order for Clorinde to feel good, you have to compromise a lot, both in terms of themes and playstyle. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Clorinde is bad, because there are Genshin characters like Line, for example, that are very good but pretty hard to play. In Clorinde's case, the first problem stems from how long her windows of uptime are. She's supposed to be a main carry type of character, but her special stance that gives her access to her main tools of damage only lasts for 7 seconds and a half. This is an historically short value for main carries in Genshin, and the significance of this is that she can feel pretty awkward to use in many types of rotations. To explain this, let's say that for example you want to play Clorinde with Beidou. Beidou's elemental burst is a 20 seconds long cooldown, which means that as a minimum her rotations will have to be 20 seconds long because that's the minimum amount of time required for her to get the burst back. For the purpose of this example, let's say that you want to play Clorinde, Beidou, Fischl and Kazuha, so a mono-electro composition. On this team, the supportive lineup of Beidou, Fischl and Kazuha only takes about 7 seconds to execute. Thundering Fury reduces the cooldown of her elemental skill every time she triggers an electro reaction. On Dendro teams, this works so well that by the time her special stance is over, her skill cooldown is also done, and so she can enter the special stance again immediately after. This means that with Thundering Fury she can manipulate her rotations however she wants, and she gets access to many more supports, but still only on Dendro teams. For example, Furina becomes much easier to use in this situation, and so Quick Bloom teams that are pretty great become available for Clorinde. Now with this I don't want to say that she's only good on Dendro teams, but admittedly there are not a lot of alternatives here. There are the Chevreuse teams that can be competitive, but mostly only if you have Chevreuse at Constellation 6, which I'm sure is not the case for most people. Oh, Ubers. You can go and try to play Clorinde with those suboptimal supports in terms of rotation, so Xingqiu, Xiangling, but the results are not that great in terms of team damage. Not in the sense that they're unplayable, because there are plenty of examples of the contrary. For example, my Discord server admin Gabra made this showcase with double Hydro Taser with Clorinde, and it was pretty good, all things considered. But at the same time, I think you can make this exact case for a lot of characters, in that if your level investment on them is high enough and you play them well enough, they can feel good even on theoretically suboptimal teams. Her optimal teams will be the Dendro teams, and this dragged a lot of people the wrong way, because it puts her in the same ballpark as Keqing, basically. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a problem, because for example when Line came out, his teams were the same as Klee, but he was significantly better than her and potentially a game-changing pull, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. And in this regard, I think that when she is at her best, she's the best performing Electro DPS in the game to me, and there is no single doubt in my mind about this. When everything goes right, she just feels considerably stronger than Keqing in terms of damage, and I have to be honest, it kind of feels like a targeted bowling from Oyver's part. That's because she feels pretty similar to use, with her windows being quite short and her burst also having pretty much equal effects, but just doing more damage. She really feels like Keqing plus, and honestly that's not a bad spot to be in. Part of this comes from the fact that she can heal herself during combat, which allows her to be used on more offensive teams compared to Keqing. I've seen some people argue that it's not enough to stay alive, but I personally believe that it's an acceptable amount if you play well enough, and this is where I leave it. The bigger issue that can really hurt her consistency is a different one, but first let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support, and also go check my Wuthering Waves channel. So the biggest issue for Clorinde in terms of gameplay is definitely her lack of interruption resistance. Obviously this is not just an issue for Clorinde, most of the characters in the game have no interruption resistance, but specifically for her, it's a bigger issue than for others, I feel like. The reason is that when she does her normal attacks to build up the bond of life, she stays in the same spot for around 1 second each time, and this makes her really vulnerable and exposed to enemy attacks. For her whole windows, she will just move in a straight line, that being her elemental skill dash, and that makes it pretty hard to control her positioning during the fight. This creates a lot of situations where you have to dash away or just move around to position yourself better in the stage, but of course this comes at the cost of how many attacks you can deal during her special stance. The requirement to dodge attacks that can stagger you make her already tiny windows look even more restrictive, and for this reason she can be a lot worse in practice than she can feel in theory. And that's where the Thundering Fury argument becomes even better in my opinion, because by making her rotations much more flexible, it puts less emphasis on her capitalizing on her short windows. Her burst is also very important for this matter, because it's a lot of guaranteed damage in AoE scenarios. I've seen plenty plenty of people say that you can skip the burst because it's better for the DPS in some cases, but honestly, I don't really see it. It's just a textbook spreadsheet argument. It adds damage, front roll, and consistency to rotation, so it's just an invaluable ability to me. But yeah, when you do everything in your power to elevate their performance, Clorinde can feel pretty great to use, really not worse than units like Navia in my opinion. But the flip side of that is that there are cases where the staggering can be too annoying and force you to use a shielder. Now, I don't really like this solution from a design standpoint because Clorinde is a character that can self-sustain and their damage is clearly partially balanced around that. But if worse comes to worse, you have to use a shielder, and that's just how reality is, sadly. My favorite shielding option here is Kirara, because Kirara can also apply Dendro for the team, and so she can replace Nahida and allow you to use Kazuha, Fischl, and Clorinde. The alternative on Dendro team specifically would be replacing Kazuha with Zhongli and keeping Nahida, which I think is just significantly worse in terms of utility because you lose the grouping and also in terms of damage. And for other teams, Thoma, Zhongli are all viable solutions. Honestly, in this scenario, Clorinde becomes astonishingly easy to use. You can basically just spam normal attacks and elemental skills and never even look at the screen. Her attacks feel very automatic and also have a lot of auto-targeting, so if you're in a situation where you're sure you're not getting staggered, she honestly feels like one of the smoothest characters in the game to use. Also, her AoE upside is deceptively good, because while her attacks don't have some kind of big range, they can pierce through opponents. This means that in a lot of cases where the opponents are close enough, you'll be hitting 2 or even 3 of them, which is pretty great. And overall, even at the worst, I think she's still at least slightly better than other Electro DPS. And to continue on the point I made before, even though she's for sure reliant on Dendro teams, characters like Cyno, Yae, Keqing are even more reliant. People have been able to make her work on pretty interesting teams, like for example my friend Jamie showcased this team with Qiqi, Furina, Zhongli and Clorinde, and it was pretty good all things considered. The idea behind this team is that Clorinde is using the Skyward Blade Sword to deal physical damage on every normal attack, and Qiqi is there to apply Superconduct on a consistent basis. Since Clorinde deals a lot of normal attacks, she will trigger the Skyward Blade effects plenty of times, resulting in a big chunk of damage. It's definitely an alternative out-of-the-box thinking kind of use, but still pretty good. Her unique synergy with some specific characters could also lead to more uses in the future. For example, Furina, that provides healing bonus through her elemental burst and makes Clorinde's own healing even better. Or more in general, healers, that through their healing can provide extra bond of life to Clorinde during her windows. This can potentially make Clorinde use more full stack skills during her uptime, but actually it's also pretty random. And that's because it's just pretty hard to correctly estimate how much bond of life you have at any given time. So for example, you have no way to know for sure when you can use a full stack elemental skill with just 2 normal attacks instead of 3. In short, it's just more consistent to stick to the normal rotation. Please, Hoyoverse, add a tracker for this shit. Overall, I think Clorinde is a pretty problematic character, but if you can put up with all of her red flag behavior, she's pretty good. At least Grizzly or Navia level, so just as I estimated in my pre-release guide. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and also go check my Emily guide. Bye bye.